Good morning, everyone. At this time, we'll go ahead and begin the Oregon Farm to School Grant webinar. Rick will be the presenter today, and my name is Karen Williams, and I will be moderating. There is a chat feature located in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and you can use that to ask questions throughout. But before we completely begin, can someone just confirm that you can hear me okay? Give me 1 minute. I have you guys on mute, so hold on. Let me fix that so you can answer me. Okay, let's try that again. Could you please confirm if you can hear me okay and that you can see the screen clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
And can you see the screen okay?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay, wonderful. So during the call, you guys will be on mute because there are so many attendees. But again, you can use the chat feature to ask questions.
Sorry?
And at the end, Rick will address those questions.
Yeah, it's the kind you like.
Okay. Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for attending the webinar. Just a reminder, we will record this and put it on our website. It'll probably it takes a little bit of time. I have to upload it to YouTube, and we have an approval process to put everything on our website. It usually takes an hour or two. But anyway, it'll be here later, so you can refer back to it if you would like. So as it says on the screen, my name is Rick, and there's a picture of me with Ginger on my shoulder, one of my chickens. The moderator who is manning the keyboards is the faceless Karen Williams. And so thank you for attending. Okay, next slide. Today, the purpose of today's webinar is for the education grant. It is a competitive grant for food-based, garden-based, and agriculture-based educational activities. If you are here we're running other webinars concurrently. If you're here for the procurement grant, which is a non-competitive grant for school districts for reimbursement of Oregon-grown or processed food, we have a separate webinar for that. We had one yesterday. We have that recorded, and we have another live encore presentation tomorrow morning for that one. So you can go back to the website and look for that. But today's is the competitive education grant. There we go. Okay, before we get too far, all materials, including this recorded webinar, can be, like I said, on the Oregon Farm to School website. I'm sure you've already been there if you've signed up for it, but just in case, you don't have to write down this link because it's kind of wordy. That's actually a shortcut. The real one is 1,000,000 characters. But basically, all you have to do is Google, in the next slide, if you Google Oregon Farm to School, you will go to what is then our old website, which is no longer there. But if you can see, it's circled in very, very small 6-point font. It says we've moved. Click there, and if you click there, you will go to the next slide, which is our real website. And so that is the Oregon Farm to School website, and the very top circled part is the Farm to School grant. Click on that, and you will get to the grant website. Now the grant website, everything on the left-hand side behind the arrow is the procurement grant, which I was just talking about. But everything that's circled on the right-hand side, that is what we're going to be talking about. That is the education grant area. So, next slide. Okay, most important, keep checking the website as things change. Things do tend to change. For instance, whenever I get questions, like if I get questions for this webinar, I'll update the frequently asked questions document. And anything that changes, I will put an updated date on there. So keep checking that. And if anything radically changes, I send something out on our listserv. So make sure you're signed up for that. Next slide. You can sign up for the listserv. There's on the main Farm to School page there at the bottom, there is a link for joining. And on the grant web page, we have a link as well. So I just said that is reversed, but this is the main page. But I have Join Us listserv links on both pages, on the grant page and the main Farm to School page. So please make sure you're signed up for that, and you'll be notified of any major changes. Otherwise, just keep checking back as I will update items as necessary. Okay, today, just wanted to make sure that you guys know about this. This is the same as last time we had a education grant, but this will be for the biennium, which means it's for both school years that we run. For this school year of 2017-18 and 2018-2019, which the school year runs actually from July 1st to September. Well, the end of the school year is usually September, but yeah, I'll go over the dates. But yeah, usually the school year happens from September to June, actually. So you guys probably know that. Okay, so today's agenda, we will basically go over an overview, a little tiny bit of history for any new people, the application process and timeline, requirements for application and scoring of the application, what the applications are scored on. We'll go over some allowable and unallowable expenses. There's been just a tiny bit of tweaking to that, not too much. And then I'm very, very briefly going to talk about reimbursement process, not going to get into detail with that, but just a very basic overview of reimbursement process and requirements and reporting, and then we'll have a question time at the end. Okay, so the bill that gives this grant authority was House Bill 2038 that was just passed this legislative session. And it directs, I'm paraphrasing here, directs ODE to award grants to Oregon school districts for reimbursement of costs incurred of purchasing Oregon food products that meet certain criteria. That's the procurement grant. And in red here is us for funding food-based, agriculture-based, and garden-based educational activities. Okay, this is a little bit of a change this year. Last year, up at the top, it's the eligible sponsors were school districts, nonprofit organizations, commodity commissions, or councils. Added for this time, we were able to expand this to include ESDs, federally recognized Indian tribes, schools overseen by the Bureau of Indian Education, and soil and water conservation districts, which, if you were a soil and water conservation district, we had 2 of them that applied last year and were successful in getting a grant, but they qualified as a nonprofit. So anyway, but now we're just made sure that those places are okay to go. Organizations may partner with each other, and all of these people, all these organizations that we've listed can partner with each other to be a part of the grant too. So also, we talk about public school districts that are eligible for this. It's the public school districts that are participating in the National School Lunch Program. One of the stipulations of the award that it has to go to needy areas. Therefore, we use National School Lunch Program free and reduced numbers to determine this. Charter schools are available only if their charter language enables them to, or basically if they are participating in the National School Lunch Program as well. Okay, what's different about this time? I think we need just to back up. There's not much different, but just going to talk about a brief history. When I first got here, it was 2012 was when this started. It was one grant that was a competitive grant for both areas, the procurement and education. It was rolled in together. At first, we had, this was just $200,000 for the whole state. In 2013-15 biennium, it got bumped up to $1.2 million. And then the previous biennium that we just finished, we got $3.3 million added to the pot. So bringing the total up to $4.5 million. It was separated into two portions during this period, which is where we're at now. 80% of the funds were for the non-competitive part for all Oregon schools for purchasing Oregon-grown and processed food, and this part that we're talking about today, which is 20% of the funds of that $4.5 million for a competitive grant for food, ag, or garden-based educational activities. So that's where we are right now. In this biennium, we have the $4.5 million that was retained. We're still at that, holding steady. And thank goodness it got passed again. So that's where we're at right now. Okay, so again, today's purpose, like I said, was for the educational opportunities of the grant. It is a competitive grant, which means we unfortunately don't have enough to go around to fund everybody that probably will apply to this, but we have the 20% of the $4.5 million after you take 2% off the top for admin support equals out to $882,000 available for these grants. Last year, that worked out well. The bill language, actually, the law says the award amounts range from $2,000 to $100,000. So that's the range we have to work with to give out of that $882,000. The average award funded last time was $37,000. The highest award funded last time was $78,500 or $78,500. We only had a couple that were like that, but most were in that $37,000 kind of range. So that might give you a lot of people to ask questions about how much should I apply for? What's reasonable? I would just point you to this slide to say this is what we did. The high ones really probably knocked it out of the park, and we were able to fund that. Now, the scoring committee that chooses applications might say, you know, your application was really strong in these areas, so we'll partially fund, like we'll fund 75% of your award, but we won't fund these areas that you talked about. So if it's super strong in all areas, and we'll look at the scoring sheet after a bit to give you guys an idea of what to do to strengthen your applications. I'm anticipating that the competition will be very strong. Everyone will have really good applications again this year. But anyway, anyway, next slide. So the grant application process, what you have to do to submit, you have to submit an application. It's a Word document on our website, and there's an application section in our application material section on the website. It'll have the application, a budget, and a budget narrative. The budget is an Excel spreadsheet that's very basic, and the budget narrative is a Word document. As well, I talk about this on another slide, but we have examples of those, of a successful budget and budget narrative that I put on there, and I redacted it to protect the innocent. But basically, there's a good example on there of a budget and budget narrative. But the main thing you guys need to do is look at also in that section is the RFA, or the request for application. That is a step-by-step guide to complete the application. So it basically explains the application in detail. That is what you need to read backwards and forwards. We have actually spent really 6 years on that document, editing it and re-editing it and tweaking it to make it more and more user-friendly. So that, as well as a couple other documents, that's what you need to read. It'll be really clear if you just take the application and fill it out without reading that. It probably won't work for you. So you'll need to print out the RFA and read it carefully. So also in the grant application process, like I said, right under the grant application materials there's a resources section. So there is a frequently asked questions document on there of relevant questions from previous times that still apply, that are on there, that are very good. You should definitely read that document. Also, all the questions from today that haven't been captured in that document will be added to it, as well as anytime I get a phone call or an email with a new question, I always put it on there. And so you look at the updated by date on there, it's on the document and on the website. I change that frequently. I add new questions to it all the time. So you'll want to look at that. For places like grantees, Oregon Department of Education uses something called Electronic Grant Management System, or EGMS. We will need to sign up for that. There's an EGMS information packet that's been updated for this school year. But if you're not already using that, you will need to sign up for it. And please don't delay that. Get it done when you're approved as a successful grantee. If you get an award letter, you'll need to do that pretty quickly and get set up for that, because it can take a couple weeks to get you set up in our EGM system. And last time we had people that didn't get signed up. They put it off. So that was a problem. So you'll want to do that anyway. And also, like I said, there's budget worksheet and narrative example. Okay, so if you're successful and you receive an award, you will get an email with links to, well, it'll have your award amount, and it'll have an explanation of, what was funded that the award committee chose to fund your award. It'll have links to an agreement letter to be signed and returned. All these items will be on the grant website, but it'll basically refer you to the grant website. That's where we want you to keep going to find this stuff. But yeah, there will be an agreement letter that has to be signed between your organization and Oregon Department of Education. There will be an Excel reimbursement form, which we'll talk about later. And like I said, the EGMS information and instructions. And it says more for this later, but I just kind of talked about it. Maybe I'll have another slide about it too. But once you're all set up in EGMS and we received the agreement letter, and there's one more thing which I'll talk about. There's one more piece to this puzzle that needs to be done. There's going to be another webinar, a mandatory webinar. Once you've watched that, about something more specific, which I'll get into later, you can start using the funds. But anyway, today it's just an informational webinar for people that are thinking about signing up for it. It's not mandatory, so I don't want you to confuse the two webinars, which I just mentioned, the other one. So today, later today or tomorrow, this webinar is going to be posted on the website, as soon as I can. Next Monday, October 2nd, is an encore performance, another live performance of the same webinar. Then coming back, the last day to ask questions is Friday, October 27th. And then the completed application is due November 3rd. And the reason we have a week lag time of dead time, I think from what I understand, it's pretty standard in a lot of grants that are competitive, that we need to have a even playing field. And so we need to get all the questions in before that date. And so I'm not supposed to answer questions after October 27th. Pretty much I would just refer you to the frequently asked questions document, which everything is usually captured in there anyway. A lot of times the questions that I get are in there. So I would encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions document before you ask questions anyway. Next slide. Then the grant application timeline continued here on November 16th. So the awards are announced. That's our announced date. We have a progress report due at the start of next school year, which will we have to report to the legislators of how it's going with this grant. This is the vehicle which we use to gather information to report back to the legislature. there, and I'll talk a little bit more about the reporting at the end of this webinar. And then June 28th, which is my birthday, if anyone wants to send me a present on that day, funds must be spent and all products must be received. And that's the end of the school year for next school year at the end of the grant. And I really want you to look at this part in red. All funds must be processed and claimed in EGIMS by July 31st. We give you a month after the school year ends. There should be no more programming taking place. You have a month to close things down. I'm really serious about this. I get this is probably one of the biggest concerns I have with the grant, especially in the nonprofit world, that people put this off. And I just had a claim just the other day in September, and this was closed down last year, and I keep getting the comments of, oh, I didn't know, or I didn't hear. You are responsible for knowing this. And this is one of the reasons I need to have a mandatory webinar again for successful grantees, because the funds need to be processed, because the new school year starts after July 31st, and all the funds will be liquidated after July 31st. Okay, so you have a final report that's due in September 30th too, and I'll talk again about reporting after a while. Okay, who can fill out the application? There are no rules for who can fill it out or who can't, so anyone can fill out the application. The person that has signature authority in your organization or who can enter into agreements has to be listed in the appropriate section of the application. So they have to obviously know what's going on. They have to be listed. Since there could be multiple school districts and other entities, other nonprofits working together on one project, it's important that all parties are aware of what's going on. So it's up to that person submitting the application that they are communicating with whoever is represented in this application. For instance, one year we had a situation where somebody filled out an application and said, oh, we're going to work with this school district. And the school district didn't really know what was going on. They're like, what's this grant that's in here? And why are people in our building or whatever? So that you really need to communicate and communicate with people to make sure that they are on board with this. That's up to you, the person that's filling out the application. So does everybody know, like if you're working with food service personnel, does principals of a school district know, superintendent, business manager, facilities, if you're working on the grounds or whatever, you need to do due diligence and figure out who your players are. Okay, scoring. I just put this in here. I wanted to focus on these next two slides. Have a copy of the score sheet. This is taken from the RFA, and this is the exact score sheet that the scoring committee looks at. So one of the biggest questions I get, or most frequently asked questions after we select, is, I wasn't selected, why was I not selected? Well, the scoring committee looks at the score sheet and they assign the points that's put there, but basically they have to, they look through your RFA, and if it's really, really wordy or vague or not spelled out correctly, you need to make sure that you zero in and say, okay, scoring committee, here's the the criteria, so make sure everything that's bulleted gets addressed. And if it's addressed well, you'll get the points for those. But if you don't address it or address it, the criteria not well enough, then you won't get the points. So really quickly, proposed project, and this is kind of in small print, and not to go over it too much because it's all in the RFA. It's up to you guys to go look at it yourself, but just really quickly, the main categories: proposed project and activity are well designed and likely to succeed, 20 points for that. And there's all the different bullets there that addresses that. The project promotes healthy food activities, 10 points for that. 20 points for project has clear educational activities. Next slide. Project involves parents and the community, 10 points for that. This one that's highlighted, educational activities are tied to school district's farm to school procurement activities. That's important. I'll talk about that, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Proposed activities are culturally relevant to students served. That's a good one, because a lot of applicants last time didn't address that, or they maybe had one sentence for these 10 points that said, yeah, we do this, but it really didn't address that. So the cultural relevance, and that's a part that's important to this grant. So there. And then the last part is, project must benefit schools with a high percentage of students eligible for free and reduced meals. So if the schools that you work with are 70% are over, you'll get 15 points. If you're 50 to 69%, you'll get 10 points. If you're 40 to 49%, you'll get 5 points. And if you're under 40, you're not eligible to apply. So a big question I get is, how do I maximize this? And my suggestion is, we look at the total free and reduced percentage of all the students, all the schools that you apply for. So if you have a super low, like for instance, under 40% free and reduced, and you wouldn't be eligible, you better partner with some more schools to bump your percentage up so you get above that mark. We've had some school districts that had like a school that was at 30%. They really wanted to do some programming there, but they partnered with another school and that was super high and was able to get their total free and reduced percentage at higher marks, so they were able to get those points and be able to qualify. Now, in the RFA and the frequently asked questions, there is a link that will show you guys how to find your percentage. We use October data from the most current October data we can get, which was last school year, October. And we use the same percentage. ODE runs a report, so we get that for the applicants. You don't have to fill it out on your application, and it says that on the RFA and the application. But if you want to know what it is, you can go online and find your percentage to your schools that you're looking at. There's a link in those documents, so you can run those reports yourself. So that's free and reduced. So, but backing up to the educational activities that tied to school districts, farm to school procurement activities. One of the purposes of this grant is overall with the other grant is to buy Oregon grown and processed food and to teach students about that food they buy. So it works out really nice if they work with your food services procurement activities. And one of the things that works out really well is that some school districts have already opted in for the procurement grant, and you can work with your school food service department if they've already opted in, and you can get maximum points if you can demonstrate that you're working with them and tying into that procurement grant. Now, you don't have to do that. You could, if your food service department doesn't participate in the procurement grant, and you can demonstrate that you work with them anyway on local purchasing, that's fine, but you could foreseeably get more points even if you can demonstrate that you're working seamlessly with your food service director and food service department, and they're participating in the grant. That might even be better. Now, we got a question that Well, that's great. I want my food service department to participate, but the opt-in period for the other grant has already passed. Well, we did set aside a little bit of money, actually, like quite a bit of money, actually. So there is some flexibility. We will allow, if you get to be, if you talk to your food service department, they're on board, they would like to work with you and opt in after the fact. If you indicate that on your application and say, yes, we are on board with they're not opted in, but they can be if we're successful, we can let them in after the fact. In the application, I got this approved. It seemed like a very good idea and makes everything stronger in this grant. So you can still get the maximum points for this after the fact. So you're welcome. Okay. So getting your money, and this is again for those folks that are successful in getting a grant. This is important to know. We had people before that didn't understand this or whatever, but the Oregon Department of Education runs these grants strictly as reimbursement grants. However, we made an exception last time with this because of the nature of the business and the nonprofit world. They typically aren't a cash flow business. They don't have a lot of cash reserves. So we are able to do up to 25% of the awarded funds as an advance. You can use up to 25% of the advance, but after the advance, it's totally a reimbursement grant, and that's as best we can do for this. The award notification, if you're successful with getting an award, we'll have instructions on how to get an advance if you want it. You don't have to get an advance. Okay, but if you do, you'll have to provide documentation. There's some stipulations with this. We were able to work through this last year. It worked pretty well. But basically, it will be the same for people if they get a review. And if you get a review, normally we pick one of the months, one of the claims, and say, okay, please provide documentations to back up this. Well, you will need to do this for your advance. So you'll need to make copies of invoices or receipts or whatever to back up your advance. Send that to us either through mail or scan or whatever, and usually my farm to school assistant will do a desk audit and match everything to make sure it's okay. And then you'll be good to go. Then you can start submitting regular claims once your advance is checks out, okay, once it's approved. So after the 25% is spent and we've verified everything is cool with it, then you can start doing claims. Okay, so and really quick, I'm not going to go over a whole lot of the reimbursement, like the reimbursement sheet. That's for another webinar, but just so you know what you're getting into if you want to sign up for this. Basically, you fill items out, you fill it into an Excel worksheet, you send that Excel worksheet to me at Oregon Department of Ed. You keep invoices, receipts on hand to justify the worksheet, but you don't send them to me. I don't want them. Just you keep them in a file to match that claim. We look it over, it's usually me, and let you know that it's okay to put a dollar amount into EGIMS. It's like, okay, you know, you've submitted a claim for $5,000. It all is great. So you just put that $5,000 into EGIMS, and then I click on it and approve it, and a batch gets run, and a check gets made to your organization. But where we had the problem with nonprofits mostly here is that people would just go ahead and put the money in the EGIMS, and then maybe, or I'd have to ask, hey, there's money in EGIMS, but I didn't get the Excel worksheet. I need to make sure it's approved. And then I would look at it. It would be wrong. I have to go in and reject it, and it gets really messy. So please don't put the funds in EGIMS first. Send things to me in the Excel web worksheet, please, because I don't want to have to. I had to do so much rejecting, and it makes when you do a printout, if you have to go look through it and audit or whatever, it gets really messy. So please, that's why we do I approve things first, and then once it's approved, then it's nice. So yeah. Okay, so again, the Excel worksheet will be located in the resources section on the grant website. I just need to tweak it a little bit more for this year, but it's pretty similar to last year's for those of you who applied last year. But we will have a new webinar for awardees of the grant that will be mandatory. You don't have to watch it live, but you could watch it recorded just like this. But it just basically goes over the Excel worksheet in detail, and a couple of those things that we require, like putting it in, not putting it in EGIMS first, when that all the funds have to be spent by July 31st of the last school year, or funds will be liquidated and adequate progress has to be made, things like that. Okay. So this is the little bit of the change for this year, other than the new entities that were allowed in, like ESDs and Indian tribes and soil waters conservation districts. That was new to this year. The other thing is at least 80% of your award must be directly related to food, ag, or garden-based educational activities. That was the same. Last year that was the case. The other 20% can be used for reasonable costs directly associated with administering the program. And a little bit more about that next. So you can have, it's reasonable to, you know, you have this program, you need to have some labor to run it and things like that. Behind the scenes, the activities that could be labor and things like that of actual for teachers that are actually doing hands-on thing. But for labor, we ask that full positions like FTE isn't listed. Like, well, we will hire a garden teacher at 1.0 FTE to run the program. We want to make sure that it says in the bill language it has to go to food, ag, and garden-based educational activities. So that means, so you have like your hours broken out that are related to the certain activities. So you could say, rather than 1.0 full-time employee or 0.5 FTE, you could say, oh, we have so many hours, like so many hours, so many weeks times this wage and benefits for these activities. It has to be spelled out that way. And there's specific examples in there in the frequently asked questions document. And equipment, capital equipment, like permanently plumbed items can't be funded. Like if you have a sink that's plumbed into your building, but you have a portable sink that's hooked up to a garden hose, that could be, you know, that you're using for educational activities, not just for processing food, but for actually used for educational activities, that could be used. Or like a greenhouse that's movable and portable and not a stick-built thing with footings. We could do that if that's instrumental for your activities and your teaching and stuff like that. That could be used. And again, there's actual examples of this stuff in our FAQ document too. Administrative expenses can be allowed. They're not to be confused with overhead or indirect costs. Indirects are basic things like electricity or just admin indirects, which a lot of places use. That's not allowable. They have to be like for instance, a manager that's overseeing the project that's actually related to this grant. Has to be spelled out what it's used for. You must be specific when describing administrative costs. They have to relate directly to the lesson or educational program or activity. You can't claim internet costs, electricity, or general administrative costs. Okay. You can claim half of your 20% other, I know that sounds confusing, but half of your 20% other costs or 10% of your total expenses for administrative expenses. So you can't use all 20 of your percent for administrative expenses. The rulemaking committee, we just said that was, we were able to, yeah, that's one change that we made. So it's half of that. Last year it was 10% and 10%. So we were able to add, you could use all 20 for the planning and implementation part of it. So labor for planning and implementation and stuff, but only 10% for administrative. So that's a change. And this is outlined in the RFA and in the budget worksheet and all that stuff. It'll be in the budget worksheet as well, example. Okay, so the review process, like we said, randomly we will select a certain percentage of grantees to be audited. It's not associated with other child nutrition program reviews. If you're selected, ODE will say, hey, we're going to take one of your claims, like your whatever, like your May claim or October claim, or whatever one one of the ones you've submitted. You give us copies of your invoices to support that claim. Send them to us here, myself or my yet to be named assistant, and we'll do a desk audit and get back with you. Adequate progress, I want to mention this. We had some issues with this. We pretty much got all our money spent last time, which was awesome, but it was a lot of management and a lot of phone calls by me, nagging people to spend their money. I think the programming happens all year long in these, but it makes me very, very anxious to wait until the last minute to spend all the money. It's not a good way to run the grant on your part. So if you're making progress on the grant, you need to be sending regular claims to start using up your funds. Don't wait until the end. If you don't wait and you don't communicate well with me on this and don't give me a solid plan, I'll have no choice but to take the money back and give it to somebody else that can use it. Okay, so what we define adequate progress is, you know, half the money should be spent halfway through the grant, 3/4 of the money should be spent 3/4 through the grant. That's a good litmus test to use your funds, okay? But what happens was sometimes, like, we'll have a $70,000 grantee and then they wait almost 2 years before they submit a claim. That makes me really crazy. Please don't do that. So that's what adequate progress is for. Okay. As I said, there's reporting. We need to talk to the legislatures when they ask us. I have to go across the street and put on a tie and tell them how we do from time to time on this. And so we will have a SurveyMonkey progress report that will be on the website, and that will be due on these dates. Both look like they're my birthday again. It's not that I choose my birthday, it's just that I think those are the last working days of September on those dates, I promise. Oh wait, no, that's June. It's not September, it's June 20. Okay, I'm sorry. The last one was June 28th. I forgot when my birthday was already. But anyway, okay, so we will have PDF copies of these on the website in October. We will post those as well. We already have the new SurveyMonkeys pretty much done, but since you will be asked to collect data, it's really good to have a PDF copy so you can print them out and know what we're going to ask you to collect in terms of data. So we need to have those on there. So we'll have PDF copies on there, and then when it is an appropriate time to post the link, we'll have the link available too. Okay, we are at the end of this now, and so we have quite a lot of time for answering questions. Any questions from the session will be captured and put on our website and added to our frequently asked questions document if they're not on there already. And we'll like I said, we'll periodically update this as more questions are received. So at that time, you can ask questions now, and also, next slide too. If you are shy and don't feel like asking a question now, you can always shoot me an email, and I'll add those questions to the thing as well. So, yeah, Karen, take it
I don't
away.
think this is a shy bunch. We have quite a few
Okay.
questions already in, and please feel free to type some more questions into the chat feature as we're going over the answers to the already submitted questions. The first one is pertaining back to your award, your average award slide. What was the lowest award given?
That was a good question. I think we had, like I said, most were in the $37,000 range, but when we got to the end, we rank everybody by the points scored, and like the top person might be more solid, and we might give them all their award or whatever, and we might, when we start going down the list and we start running out of money. Now, I say we, I want to clarify something. I convene the application committee. I'm not a voting person. I like to distance myself from this because, I have relationships with food service directors, having done one before, and I know people. So I convene the committee, but the application committee is anonymous. We recruit them, and they won't have a conflict of interest with any of the applications they score. But when we start going down the list and we go from the top scores, and there's a line when we run out of money. And at that point, we can adjust some to say, well, this one below the line has some really neat points, so we want to partially fund that. It's up to them to decide, and we discuss that. But I think last time we had had just a little bit, like $4,000 left over at the end. And so we said, hey, we had an outfit that might have had one for $40,000, but, we only had $4,000 left. So there's those opportunities there to say, well, hey, you're welcome to this $4,000 if you want it. So when we get down to the end, that's when we start partially funding. But we don't have any rule about what is the lowest amount to give, other than the threshold of, what did I say? $2,000? Yeah, $2,000. That's the low amount, but that we ask you to apply for. But if we have any left over, we can go lower than that.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, how many total applications were submitted?
I think there was about, last time, I think there was about 40 or 50 on the top of my head. I think we had in the 30 range that we were awarded, and we had about maybe 10 or 15 that weren't. So it was around that. There could be a lot more this time. That we've had this grant now in this format for 2 years, so there could be more. I don't know.
The next question is, can the educational activities be focused on the 2018/19 school year and not both half of this year and all of next year?
We had some people that did that last year, and especially since it was brand new, and we had people like, okay, I'm going to be doing a little bit of my planning and implementation the rest of this school year, because we're going to well, of course, last time we didn't give this out until like January, I believe, or something. But this time we'll be announcing the awards in November, so there's a little bit more time. But I would, if you choose to do something like that, make sure that you're very clear about it in your application and say, we're going to, here's our time frame for implement. We're going to be doing a little bit more of our planning phase this school year in the winter, and then start it in the spring and the fall. Again, it makes me a little nervous, and a well-rounded application would be using the full time. There's no stipulation about that, but we want to make sure the money is being spent. So I don't want to say, yeah, I'll give you a pass, and I'll just wait until spring of the following year. You know, let's not do anything that crazy. But yes, you can do that, but just be very specific in your application process of your timeline.
Next question is, can one of the required signers be employed by the grant?
Yes, yeah, that they can be. So if we give a grant to an entity like a nonprofit, and they work for that nonprofit, they can certainly, yeah, that would be allowable.
Next question is, can we get the results of our scoring?
Yes, you can. It was, I need to make sure that we capture notes. You won't be able to, we could give you general, your score and general comments of why you were or weren't successful. We just obviously can't give identities of the scorers. You know, that has to be kept anonymous. But yes, you can get feedback.
Okay, next question is, are projects that reach more students given higher priority?
Not necessarily, no. It just says that it needs to go to school districts that are needy, or schools or children that are needy. We have had school districts or that, I keep saying school districts, but we've had applicants that have used school districts and they've focused on maybe one school or two schools, and we've had that have incorporated entire school districts. It just depends on how you're, you know, like you want to maximize your free and reduced numbers. We get that, but we want to, I'm glad you guys brought this part up, and I've said it many times in past webinars, but you know, one of the goals of this grant was we want to be able to award these awards to high free and reduced, obviously, and places that are able to use, that show that they have a very diverse background of ethnicity, and we want to also do very big school districts, very small school districts. We want to do urban school districts. We want to do very rural. That's very important. We want to do places on the coast in Eastern Oregon, in Southern Oregon. We've had comments before that from legislators that why didn't you give anybody in my district that was in this remote area? And I was very candid and I said, because no one applied. Now, last time we were able to have some on the coast in Southern Oregon and Eastern Oregon, but that is one of the things. So the committee does take that into account when we're saying, well, gee, we've already given a bunch in this area, and if your score is close to another score, but you're in a different geographical area, which we didn't award, that could be in your favor too. It's just, we want to take all that into account, but no, we're not going to give preference over a larger than a smaller. Now, I would say that probably a larger one would get a larger award. It's like we wouldn't give probably $100,000 award to somebody, just off the top of my head, that's doing a school for 150 people, unless it was like going to get a Nobel Prize for something. I mean, it would have to be really, really a strong application for something. So everything is relative, and probably the more money would go to the more students. One thing we do figure out too, we run a little matrix just to look at it. It doesn't account in for the scoring, but we do say, you know, if we did this award, like how many dollars per student would go through, and we kind of, that's one of the factors we look at, you know, in terms of, gee, you know, how things, it's just one of the tips and tools we have. So that's one of the things we use as well. But There, that was a long-winded answer, but I think I got it.
Okay, next question is, are RCCIs, residential child care institutions, who are in the NSLP eligible for application?
We have, they are not, no. What, go ahead and go to the next slide too and show this here, just once in a while. So, it's very clear the law is written who is eligible, and it is actually school districts, ESDs, tribal organizations that were listed, commodity commissions and councils, and watershed districts. And unfortunately, RCCIs don't fall into one of those categories. I guess the only other thing that would be if there aren't any RCCIs, residential child care institutions, that fall into that are in a school district, I believe, but no, so they're not eligible to apply.
Okay, the next question is, to clarify, if your organization works with multiple schools and one or two have FRLs below 40%, but your overall average FRL of all schools included in the proposal is above 40%, are all of the schools in the proposal eligible to receive services paid for by the grant, or just those schools above 40% on their own? That
is how we framed it before. And for those people that don't know what FRL is, free and reduced, the free and reduced percentage this person is talking about, that is how we've done it before. If your application is below 40%, you're not eligible to apply. But if your application is over 40%, then that is good. And so it depends on the overall population of your application. So that is correct. If you have a school that is below 40%, as long as they roll up to the total aggregate of 40% or above, then you're good to go.
Okay. If we were a grantee last year, would the committee prefer to see continuity of existing programming or a new program/schools, or neutral?
I would say neutral. That's a good question. Sometimes, it depends on the committee. We like to see new and innovative things, and we don't want to really continue to fund the same old thing. There is that. We like to do that, but if what you're doing is like unfinished and still needs to be done, and you were a grantee last year, it kind of depends too. I would say, like, if the applications are weak, you got to do what you got to do. And it's like, well, these guys were solid last year. They did a great job, and they're doing the same thing. So I could see if the committee would award them. There's no restrictions on that. However, we really like to say, oh, here's another program that no one thought of, and I would love to see if this could work, and it sounds really solid. That can be really intriguing. So it could go either way on that. I would just say, I think it'd be safe to say, okay, if you're already doing, you already did a grant, and you're doing the same old thing, it might be nice to say, yeah, we're doing this, but here's a new wrinkle we're adding to it that can improve it. Where we didn't really address the diversity thing, and we really want to, concentrate on that this year. Or here's a new program, sub-program of that. That would make your application stronger.
Okay. Is there a place where we can view last year's successful grant abstracts?
There is not at this point, but I can put a successful grant on there in the very near future. By next week, I will commit to getting one on there, one or two that it's kind of redacted with names changed to protect the innocent. I can do that. Yeah.
What date will the funds be available?
After the award is announced in November, I think I said November 16th. That's whenever the grant is announced. As soon as we give you your letter on that date and you're able to give the agreement back to me, and you're set up in EGIMS, you're good to go. So probably it'll take about 2 weeks after that, November 16th date. But as soon as that date happens, when I say you're good, you can start spending, but you just can't get reimbursed yet. Or, we need to get your agreement in. You can do that really quick. And then you'll get the reimbursement process that happens when you get set up in EGIMS.
May part of the request include time spent on planning?
Yeah, you can use up to 20% of your funds for planning and implementation. It just has to be in the grant budget and budget narrative.
Okay. Would a garden educator's weekly time spent planning / curriculum prepping materials to be considered in the 80% of the direct educational activities or in the 20% other expenses?
I think I heard Karen say planning. If it's planning, it has to be in the planning part. If it's actually hands-on teaching kids, then it's in the activities part.
Okay. On the ODE website for pulling data for FRL data for schools, we work with one that is listed with asterisks across the page and the data isn't available. Are they still eligible to be included in the grant?
Yeah, I think those ones, you can talk to me personally about those schools, send me an email, but typically those ones, it might be a very, very small alternative school with numbers below a certain threshold, and they're either that or they're 100% free and reduced, and 100% doesn't show up. I think that's what it is, but I can double check on that for you. Hang on just a second, you guys. Okay, there's 3 questions. We're going to hit those 3, and then if any more come in, I'm going to have to cut this because we're at the hour right now, and I will capture any more on the frequently asked questions document. But these are great questions. Go ahead.
As a follow-up, what is considered an appropriate range for the dollar per student amount?
I have no appropriate range. That's just something we look at. It's based on, I couldn't even gather a guess right now because we don't know how many applicants are going to be with it would depend, but that's just one of the things we look at to, if there's like a tie goes to the runner, if there's, if we're looking at different geographical areas and things like that. No, I would just, when you're doing these applications, it just would seem like you wouldn't want to do the large end of the grant award for a small school. We want to be able to try to utilize our resources as much as we can. I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but okay.
Can educational activities for teachers be paid for through this grant? Can educational activities for teachers, and then they have PD, be paid for through this grant?
There is a scoring part on here for parents and the community, but the grant, the majority of this is supposed to go to students. So it's not really the intent to use the grant for teachers. Now, there are some things like you might have to teach the teachers to teach the kids, and that could be part of your planning. There is that. So you might be able to use those that way.
Okay. And then the last question is 80% of the grant goes directly to activities, up to 10% of the grant admin, and up to 20% program manager or planning and developer.
So that adds up to 30%, right? So, okay, well, go ahead.
So that totals 110%.
Right.
Is the grant saying to divide?
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that does add up to 110%, or 80 plus 10 plus 20. The 30 is one. Yeah. So I said it was a little confusing. So what you have to realize is 80% has to go to educational activities, period. Now you can do 100, but you can use 20 for other items. You can use that whole 20 for planning and implementation, okay? Or you can use 10 or half of that 20 for the administrative part. So it's still 80 and 20, but it looks like 80, 20, and 10. But that's why it's confusing, and we have the same thing over in the food procurement grant. But basically, it's 80%. You'll be fine as long as you remember that 80% has to go to activities. The other 20 can go for other. Of that 20, you can use half of it for admin, but you can't use the whole 20 for admin.
Okay. And with that ends the webinar session. Again, if you have any questions that you weren't able to ask, or if you think of any at a later time, please email them to Rick.
And I will say that, as is the case with yesterday, I got inundated with emails, a ton of them, so be patient with me. I'll get to your questions, and I'll make sure I get them on the FAQ document. Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a great day.